Sego, I'm John Kane, and this is Resistance Radio, and we will not be idle anymore. That's the whole point of the radio show. We are trying to educate people about what Native people experience and what our resistance looks like, how we're doing it, the help we need, and that's why we do the show. Uh, Been a busy week. Monday was is designated by some as Indigenous Peoples Day. I'll say it again. It's not a day that I celebrate. I will talk about Native issues on any opportunity that I'm given, and I was given some. I was on with Bob Hennelly on WBAI on Monday morning, and then I was with Katia Stitt on WPFW in the afternoon. Both for them to help kick off their current fund drive, but also to talk about Indigenous Peoples Day, talk about some of the issues that Native people face. As many of you know, I am in the process of rolling out a film that we had produced called The Long Hope, and we cover a lot of those issues there. We've done a couple of screenings, done one in New York. We got another one coming up in November, and so that's kept me busy. I also made it out to Hofstra University on Tuesday night to screen the film Sugarcane, which is a film produced on the Canadian side. It was nominated for an Oscar. It's a documentary detailing, in a very narrow sense, the experiences that people had at a residential school on the Canadian side that actually led all the way to folks going to meet with the Pope and all of that. It is a tough film to watch. Again, the film is called Sugarcane. I think it's still streaming on a couple of streaming services. We screened it out there in Hofstra, and I got a chance to do a Q&A. I was joined by my good friend Harry Wallace, who had come out also for some other events during the day at Hofstra I don't want to say in celebration, commemoration, in acknowledgement of Indigenous Peoples Day. So it was great to catch up with Harry. We go back a long way on a lot of issues, so that was a great opportunity. And of course, here I am. So I went to New York. Didn't get back till last night, and now I'm doing radio in New York, but I'm doing it from the Cattaraugus territory of Seneca Nation, as I do most days. So we have this show today. I'm doing another show tomorrow. Usually, the show that I do here in New York rebroadcasts in Washington D.C. on WPFW, but I will be doing a separate live show in D.C. For tomorrow. There's stuff going on. So this Saturday, I'm sure if you're listening to this station, you're aware of the No Kings Day or the No Kings March that's going on. There's also an Indigenous Peoples Day march that's happening now, or parade, I guess. Again, I'm not one to celebrate these days, especially since it's shared with a nemesis, a historical nemesis of ours. So I don't know much about the parade that's being done, who's participating, who's organizing it. I was made aware of it when I was out in Hofstra this week. But I do know that it's taking place on Saturday before the No Kings March, by the way. It's starting at Madison Square Park and marching from 26th Street to 17th and Broadway, I guess. So the lineup is at 9 o'clock, and the opening ceremony, I guess, is at 10 a.m. Again, don't know that much about it. I'm not much of a parade person, and this is kind of a parade, not necessarily a protest march. The No Kings thing is more of a march and a kind of a protest march. So that's happening. I suspect that's going to kind of be a bigger event, and I'm sure Reggie has more information on exactly what's happening with that because I know that I think WBAI is going to send some folks down there. Is that correct, Reg?
You talking about in regards to this coming Saturday?
Yeah, the No Kings March.
Yeah, that's supposed to start at noon, and it's supposed to be part of a national broadcast
Okay.
that's being led by. It's going to be led here in WBAI. So yeah, it's supposed to be from my understanding, it's supposed to start at noon, or 11
11
a.m.
a.m. I
and it's
think I
supposed
saw. Yeah. Okay. Yep.
yeah, 11 a.m. and it's supposed to conclude somewhere around 3 p.m.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, so that's what that is,
Of course, we're not
and
telling anybody to go there. We're not doing a call to
no,
action. That's
no, no,
we are
no,
actually
no.
restricted from doing that. So I'm not saying that anybody should do anything. We're just making you aware of what is happening there.
Absolutely
Um, Let me say
correct.
this: there's a certain irony from a native perspective, and I got to tell you that, especially because I'm Mohawk and I live in Seneca territory. The call for no kings in the United States is ironic because, from a native standpoint, we were treated much worse by the colonial development, the colonies and the United States, than we were by the king. The king actually issued a royal proclamation and put lines in the sand and said there will be no expansion in the native territories. He carved out parcels of land even on the Canadian side. So there's an irony that as native people in that era, we were treated more fairly by an authoritarian than we were by those claiming to be fighting for freedom. Because let's be honest, the Declaration of Independence, it was they were trying to shed what they were calling tyranny, but it was really restrictions on what they were able to do in this new land. And so there's a certain irony because look, I oppose authoritarian rule, but we as Native people, we've experienced more authoritarian rule at the hands of the United States, from George Washington to current president to Donald Trump. So I mean, when you think about the fact that the United States actually voted against the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and the crazy part is, I had the opportunity, we talk about this in my film, by the way, but I had the opportunity to go to Washington during the Obama administration and to attend a series of meetings about reconsideration of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples that the previous administration, back in 2007, had voted against. So the first day was kind of blather. I mean, it was the so-called federally recognized tribes meeting at with the State Department and various, and there wasn't a whole lot of meaningful dialogue there. But the next day, which was held at the museum, the Native American Museum, part of the Smithsonian museum system, there at the auditorium there, they lined the stage with representatives of almost every federal agency. I mean, almost everyone. I'm sure there were some left out, but it was a packed stage. And then in the audience were Native people, and we were considered what do they say, the NGOs. We were just the people. We weren't there down there representing specific leadership roles or anything like that. And one of the things that I brought up when we had a chance to ask some questions, I said, so why did the United States vote against it? And of course, this is their opportunity to kind of throw the previous administration under a bus. And basically, what they said was the concern that came out of the National Security Council or agency. I don't know, council or agency. I think they're two different things. But anyway, the concern was that the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples was going to rewrite international law as it applied to Indigenous peoples. Now, it didn't. I mean, not really. I mean, it didn't really say anything that wasn't already a part of the UN Declaration on the Right on human rights. But because we weren't just individuals fighting for our individual human rights, we were political entities as Indigenous people. We represent not a race of of an occupied population. We represent people that are politically distinct. And so that's kind of what I would say the difference between Indigenous peoples and the Declaration of the Rights of Human Rights. But so they were concerned that it was going to rewrite international law, and part of it is because the United States was trying to rewrite some policies. What they were trying to suggest was the notion of self-determination. That's not the United States didn't want to use the international definition of that, which was essentially like statehood. That a people have the right to determine their own futures. Their self-determination means that they get to determine who they are, how they govern, how they are represented, and that kind of stuff. So, and whether to assert themselves as individual states or as, enter into agreements, compacts, treaties, if you will, all of that stuff. So that's the international agreement recognized self determination as, without saying the words, certainly in the UN DRIP, mentioning sovereignty, our sovereignty, they were recognizing us more distinctly as autonomous peoples. The United States, however, they wanted to have more of a control setup, like how many links of the chain they would put us on. They wanted to be able to regulate the metes and bounds of what our sovereignty or our autonomy would be. They didn't want to recognize that we had the right to control our lands, for instance, or to assert sovereignty over our lands or our resources. None of that stuff. The United States was opposed to that. And they said it. I mean, I'm not just saying this as an opinion. It was written in their, when they were reporting back to the Bush administration about the concerns from the NSA on the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. This is what they wrote. And I know because I had a copy of it. I don't have it here in front of me. I wish I did, but had a copy of it. But see, the problem is that there are certain things in the United States and throughout the world that exist or existed a long time ago and never changed with the times. And so when I talk about slave era legal doctrines like the doctrine of discovery and the trust doctrine and the plenary powers doctrine, that actually was confronted in the preamble of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which was very problematic for the United States and still remains very problematic. So let me read only one of the affirmations in the preamble of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And you'll know exactly what I'm talking about here. It says, affirming that all doctrines, policies, and practices based on or advocating superiority of peoples or individuals on the basis of national origin or racial, religious, ethnic, or cultural differences are racist, scientifically false, legally invalid, morally condemnable, and socially unjust. I mean, that's the third affirmation of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And it could not be more directly connected or targeting that doctrines like the doctrine of Christian discovery. So, I mean, again, it says that all doctrines, policies, and practices that are based on the superiority of peoples based on racial, religious, or ethnic or cultural differences. Well, the doctrine of Christian discovery is based on ethnicity, religion, and even though race wasn't really as well defined until Christians became white people, it was really just ethnicity and religion. But they based this notion of superiority over anybody who wasn't Christian. I mean, the doctrine of Christian discovery basically came from the Vatican directly, and this was before there was any separation of churches, by the way. There was one church, the Catholic Church. The Vatican basically presided and served as the God on earth kind of stature, and they dictated much about the authority of the monarchs. And so it was out of the Vatican, in these papal bulls, that this notion of authorizing and promoting that the Christian nations of Europe were essentially being delegated or ordered to spread Christendom and to spread it within the pagan world. So what the papal bulls suggested was that they were to go and they were to invade, vanquish, take over the lands and the peoples who were considered pagan Saracens and other enemies of Christ. They could go into those lands, and based on the Vatican's authority, they could claim the lands, the freedom, the lives, and all of the resources of people who were not Christians. I mean, there could be nothing that is more demonstrative of this order, I guess you would say, or this part of the preamble of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And it'd be different if you said, okay, well, yeah, but that was slave era. That was the 1820s that this was developed. No, it was cited a month ago in a court in California. A month ago. And not only did they cite this authority that the United States has to acquire lands via discovery, but they actually even cited the case, which was called Johnson v. McIntosh, which is the one that codified. And ironically, let me tell you this something about Johnson v. McIntosh. I never really talked about the details of it. It's two white guys. It's two white guys who are like challenging the authenticity of their land grants, if you will, or the land that they are occupying. And it turns out there wasn't even a property dispute. The lands didn't even touch each other. But you have one guy claiming, well, but we got the land from the Indians. We got it from the Illinois. We got it from the native people there. They sold us the land. And the other guy saying, yeah, but no, we got it from the federal government, a land grant through the federal government, which has the power based on the discovery doctrine and the royal proclamations that came, from England. So you have a dispute raging between what could legitimately turn into the occupation of native lands or previously native lands, whether the native people themselves could have a role in selecting or granting white folks to either take title or take occupancy on land, or whether it had to come to the federal government. And this judge, the longest serving Chief Justice of the United States, John Marshall, basically heard the argument from I guess it would be the defendant, saying, no, only the federal government can determine title because Native people had no rights to do that. They were stripped of that. And in fact, what they argued was that Native people never had any sense of ownership of lands. Now, the crazy part is, again, this is 1823. There's already been a dozen or more treaties entered into by the United States where the United States has clearly said, we recognize that the land is yours. We're the Haudenosaunee, the Six Nations. We had a treaty that was written up by white folks by the George Washington administration in 1794, and it basically said three times in the treaty, three times, that the United States acknowledged that the land was ours, and it specified three different nations. But the one that usually gets cited is the one that says the Seneca Nation. But it says that we recognize that the land is yours, and that we will never claim the same nor disturb you with the free use and enjoyment of that land. I mean, that's what the United States said. They wrote it in the treaty. That's 1794. Go to 1823, and now you got a judge, and it's ironic because we hear all the time about the right saying, well, we don't believe that there should be activist judges. Well, you had no problem with an activist judge that was stealing land. So that's what Johnson v. McIntosh was, and that's how it codified into U.S. law this notion that Native people could not, did not, and would never possess title to their own lands. Now, that's disputable. In fact, I live here on the Seneca territory, the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation, and they hold the original title to the land here. And in fact, it has been batted around by by the New York State Legislature and the federal government as to who owns this land, and there's no question that the Senecas own it. In fact, there was just a ruling the other day, last week. The Senecas have been challenging the fact that the thruway was run through the territories at a time when native territories, native peoples were being terminated by the federal government. And under this threat of termination, the state government pushed the thruway through Seneca territory. And of course, there's a rail that goes through here. There's pipelines that go through here. There's power lines that go through here. All of these easements were forced upon the Senecas for almost nothing. And most of these easements, in fact, all of the easements, as far as I'm aware of, never had the federal government involved, which was the law. There was a thing called the Non-Intercourse Act, which forbid individuals and states from doing any land agreements with Native peoples, and especially lands that were going to be surrendered. So a judge just last week agreed with the Senecas that New York State had violated federal law in pushing the thruway through here. So I don't know what that's going to mean. I mean, you know how most of this stuff ends up, just being a dollar figure. They'll calculate, some fraction of the tolls that had been collected by the New York State thruway as it runs through here. But I always say the thing about that case, it's not just about the tolls. It's about the fact that New York State, in fact, the United States, has had unfettered access running through Seneca territory and other native territories, mind you. But in this specific instance, we're talking about the Senecas. They do it with rail. The Senecas don't even get a notice if there's hazardous waste going through the territory. They get nothing. They have no regulatory controls over what is transported through their territories. Now, states may be able to flex a little bit of that muscle or counties even, or townships, but not us. The trains, we went through this whole thing with bomb trains that were bringing that Bakken crude right through Seneca territory out to Albany, down along the Hudson, and then down into New Jersey and beneath and below there. And the regulation said only when those trains went through areas that met a certain population threshold did they even need to slow down. So these things go hauling ass across Seneca territory. This is carrying volatile fuels that have a much lower flash point than even normal crude did, and the Senecas had no say over it. So I mean, and that's the rail. That's not even to talk about what's being transported on the highway. And here's the ironic part: is we actually are expected to pay the tolls for traveling the thruway. Now, I will say, we don't use a whole lot of the thruway, the section that goes from one part of the territory to the other. There's a toll exit on either end. So the section that goes through Seneca territory, we almost never travel that. But the fact of the matter is, when we do travel, we still have to pay the tolls on the thruway. Even though, going back to the Canandaigua Treaty and others, we were never supposed to be charged a fee or a toll for roads or bridges on what was our ancestral lands, and we are all the time. So, yeah, again, when you think about how much the United States and the states have violated, and again, keep in mind that the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, it's considered the minimum standard, and it really is. I mean, it doesn't nearly come close to addressing, I mean, as I said, it never once addresses us as sovereigns or even acknowledge our desire to be sovereigns. There's nothing in the UN DRIP that does that. What the UN DRIP does have in it is several clauses, and I want to say there's at least a half dozen clauses where they talk about either redress or impacts that we might get from the colonial powers about us, where, according to the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, free, prior, and informed consent are required under international law, under this declaration, for a whole host of, whether it's settlements, whether it's policies that impact us, environmental issues, and the United States hates that. In fact, it was reported that, for all intents and purposes, the international community says that Native people have veto power on anything that impacts them. Well, I gotta say this because I go back to Joe Biden heading down to Arizona to issue an apology and to talk about the fine work that Deb Haaland did. We weren't involved in any of the reporting or any of that report that her and the Interior Department did on residential schools. And so the idea that Joe Biden goes down to Arizona to apologize for it as one of the recommendations made by Deb Haaland, we never gave free, prior, and informed consent to the resolutions that she came up with, nor did we offer any kind of free, prior, and informed consent to the conclusions that came out of that. We weren't even a part of it. There was no truth and reconciliation. It was just the employees of Joe Biden crafting a report that was a travesty in of itself. And I talked about some of this stuff when I went out to Hofstra this past week. I think people have to know that when the United States is guilty of something, they will never admit it, even as they apologize for it. You can go back to Hawaii, when the United States essentially accomplished an illegal coup by taking over and illegally occupying the Kingdom of Hawaii and essentially, imprisoning the Queen of Hawaii. Years later, they would apologize for it, but they would never really admit. And in fact, here's the thing about the apology. See, the apology came during the Clinton administration. And when Hawaiians suggested and let me clarify. It wasn't just an apology. It was a joint resolution of Congress, which isn't a law. A joint resolution isn't a law. It is a kind of a an announcement, I guess, more than anything. But anyways, this joint resolution of Congress, which was considered the apology resolution, when Hawaiians tried to use that joint resolution of Congress in court, the Supreme Court says, "Oh no, it carries no, it has no legal standard merit. You can't use a joint resolution of Congress in a court of law, and it's not any proof or evidence of wrongdoing. Then what the hell did you apologize for?" And of course, when Joe Biden goes to Arizona to apologize for residential schools, he basically calls it a sin, not a crime. And it's kind of like this, what the Hawaiians went through. I mean, there's no question that the United States broke their own law. And that's the crazy thing. Much of the things that Native people, whether it's Hawaiian people or whether it's us people here, most of what we are fighting back against the United States over is not even violations of international law. It's violations of their own law. Those three legal doctrines, the doctrine of Christian discovery, the trust doctrine, and the plenary powers doctrine, there's no basis in U.S. law. There's no basis in the Constitution. And you even have a couple of the Supreme Court justices, ironically, it's Sam Alito and Clarence Thomas, who have questioned some of that authority. Now, I'm not saying that they're fans of ours. I'm not suggesting that Clarence Thomas and Sam Alito believe that we can be, should be, or are sovereign. In fact, what their arguments are is the inconsistencies about the United States and the court system, sometimes recognizing sovereignty and sometimes not recognizing sovereignty. Clarence Thomas called the courts schizophrenic as it relates to Native people. But they also question whether there's really any constitutional basis for the courts having essentially determined that it's settled law that Congress should have ultimate and an unchallengeable authority over Native peoples. That's what Clarence Thomas and Sam Alito have both questioned. And they're saying, show us where it says that. And don't just don't just try to contort the Commerce Clause into that. Show us how it can be possibly have been deemed constitutional. Especially if you look at the records, not only from the Articles of Confederation that existed before the Constitution, but even much of the dialogue and much of the note-taking and all the stuff written in margins and all the things that were debated going into the U.S. Constitution, there was nothing that talked about conquest or owning Native people or owning authority over us. The only thing that comes out of the Constitution is acknowledging that we're not a part of it. So how do we become wards of the state? How do we become under this plenary powers doctrine? How does the United States appoint themselves our trustees? There's no legal basis for it. So much of what we fight, and it's the same thing that the Hawaiians are saying, you violated your own law. There was no annexation treaty of Hawaii, and if there were, it would have had to been approved by 2/3 of the Senate. But instead, only through a joint resolution of Congress, which is just a majority, and it was a slim majority at that, it wasn't even 2/3. It was only through a slim majority of Congress in a joint resolution where they fabricated this notion of taking in the territories of Hawaii. So, I mean, the law is clear. They wrote it. They just don't follow it. So, on Saturday, when folks head down in New York City and across the country, do these protests, rallies, and these marches, No Kings, it's a kind of a strange name. And part of it is because of the authority that Trump is trying to assert and how much authority the courts and Congress are giving him. But it should be clear, these rallies, these marches, are supposed to be in opposition to authoritarian rule. But I got to tell you, people have remained silent when it comes to authoritarian rule over Native people. I mean, think about the idea that there are these slave era legal doctrines based solely on Christian supremacy and ultimately white supremacy. And look, when you read The rulings written, crafted by John Marshall, it is loaded with Christian references and the superior genius of Europe. It is loaded with all this white supremacy language. There's no question about it, and that's not interpretation. That's what it says. I mean, he went so far as to say, however extravagant the pretension of converting a an occupied country, of the discovery of an occupied country into conquest over those people and country, however extravagant the pretension. In other words, how no matter how big that exaggeration or that lie is, if you can assert it in the first instance and sustain it, then you can make it truth. You can make that lie truth just by sustaining it. Well, here's the problem. It wasn't asserted in the first instance. It would be 30 years before they would even try to codify this doctrine of Christian discovery into U.S. law. In the meantime, this is the birth of the United States. You've already moved past the work of many of those so-called founding fathers. So when John Marshall says, well, the framers of the Constitution intended this, hell, this was after some of those guys already died or were so old that they were, well, no, most of them had died. They were no longer in governance. So the idea that he's making these claims about people who are not even there to substantiate his claims, because it is between the 1823 and 1833 that Chief Justice John Marshall created these authoritarian legal doctrines that every law related to Native people would be built upon. So I'd have trouble going to a rally where the mantra is no more kings when you consider what the presidents, the courts, and Congress has done. Because you don't need a king to assert authoritarian rule. Obviously, look at Donald Trump. He's not a king. He's the president. He was elected. The majority of Americans voted for this moron. Ironically, this is one of the reasons why again, it's ironic. Ironically, this is one of the reasons why the founding fathers of the United States did not advocate democracy in its truest sense, because they were concerned about how stupid their electorate would be. That's why only wealthy white people were allowed to vote. They didn't want their ignorant masses voting. And Donald Trump, he loves the uneducated. That's what he says, right? I love the uneducated. And that's what he's keyed on. So if and when you go to any of these no king rallies, just make sure that you're advocating against authoritarian power, not just the notion of a king. Because obviously Trump's immediate answer is, I'm not the king. But he's trying to assert powers and the system of checks and balance. If it ever existed, which you got to question whether there really was any system of checks and balances. If they aren't working, then where are they? And if the courts can be flipped the way they are, and again, I gotta say this. As I talk about authoritarian power, where's Jackson, Sotomayor, and Kagan? They keep going along with this notion that the plenary powers doctrine, the ultimate authority and exclusive authority of Congress over Native peoples, they keep treating this as settled law. And they do it for a reason. They believe that Congress has an obligation to protect us from the tyranny of the states. Well, how the hell does that work? And again, when I went to Washington to discuss this issue about the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, when they went beyond their concern about whether this would change what self-determination means, the other thing that I was told by the people who were organizing, moderating this whole event, that the concern was that it would disrupt the current remedy that existed to resolve conflicts with Native peoples. And they kept saying it. I asked them, well, what is this current remedy? And they said, well, our court system. Our issues with you aren't legal issues. They are political problems. We are political entities. to suggest that we could come into your courts says that we have already subjugated ourselves to you. And that's our argument. Our argument is that we have never been subjugated. We were never included in your original Constitution. And even as you declared that we were wards of the federal government, citizens of the United States, still maintaining that we were wards even as you declared we were citizens, we didn't have a say in the matter. You did that all under your authoritarian rule, all under Congress's plenary powers over us, which is a fallacy, which is false. We are not a conquered people. And I know, look, there's a whole lot of white people out there who are all defending Columbus Day, who are saying, well, Native people got to get over it. They were conquered. No, we weren't. Let me be clear here. There were at best 50 documented armed conflicts between the United States, the colonies, I mean, the United States, the early colonies, up till now. There was only less than 50 documented armed conflicts. And the United States didn't win them all. But even if they had, that's only 50. There was over, and there still are, arguably, over 1,000 distinct native peoples that live on this continent. Many of whom never had a physical or armed or military conflict with the United States. So there's no basis. In fact, most of the conflicts that did take place didn't result in a pure collapse of the native peoples through a surrender treaty. They may have negotiated peace. They may have entered into peace treaties, but they were not the same as surrender. It wasn't like Appomattox, right? Is that where they signed the treaty? I mean, yeah, it wasn't, or was it Appomattox or Fort Sumter? I don't know. It doesn't matter. It's not my war. It was white people fighting each other or black people, I guess. So, yeah, you got to chuckle at that one. But yeah, I mean, we didn't enter into surrender agreements, and the fact that we got herded onto reservations was again tyranny. Authoritarian rule. It wasn't like we agreed to it. You know, people know about sundown towns and how black people had to make sure that they weren't around white villages after the sun went down. Native people experienced the same thing. We were lynched. We were enslaved. We were the victims of sundown towns. And I'll say that only the generation, actually it was my generation, there are older people that I'm associated with who knew that if they, even though there was no necessarily, I mean, there was not necessarily a, what do you call it, a curfew, but if you were native and you were in a white village, you were going to get arrested for something. I'm not saying like a gang of vigilantes was going to necessarily lynch you. That happened too, but I'm not saying it happened to my generation. So, but we did have this vigilante justice that took place against Native people. The same thing that black people went through. It's just not documented. I'll give you another tidbit of information. Native people, with the exception of one specific age demographic, the 16 to 21-year-old males, Native people lead as a proportion of our population in death by cop. We die at the hands of police at a higher rate than anybody else in the United States. And it's only in that 16 to 21 age demographics that black men lead that category. It's not a race we want to win either, by the way. But who knows that? And you know what? Native women, it's the same thing. I think somebody told me that, and I'm going to get the percentage wrong, but it's some ungodly percentage of women in prison in Canada are over 50%. Over 50% of the prison population in Canada are Native women. Native women only represent 5% of the population, of the female population, but they represent 50% of the prison population. And those numbers exist like that. So every horrific statistic that can be associated with diminished quality of life, we lead in it as a percentage of our population. Now, again, we're a small population, so our total numbers are not as high as what other oppressed people have gone through. But as a percentage of our population, we lead in suicide, substance abuse. And when I say suicide, let me just say this. There was almost nothing listed for suicide of children. a child who committed suicide was such an anomaly in the prior to the 1960s. It was such an anomaly that they didn't even keep the records on it. And yet, the amount of suicides that Native children were victims of, almost predominantly due to residential schools, but also due to the poverty in our territories. It wasn't an anomaly for Native people. And it wasn't until others started committing suicide, other distinct peoples started committing suicide, that they even started to keep track of our numbers. So suicide amongst children, youth suicide, we always had it from the moment white people came into our territories. Infanticide, we had parents who killed their own children. Back with Columbus. When Columbus came to the islands, women were drowning their babies rather than have them be enslaved, mutilated, or fed to the dogs. They were literally giving live babies to their attack dogs. Columbus and his men were. Yeah. So, not a fan of the Columbus Day. I'm not a fan of the Columbus Day. I'm also not a fan of sharing the day with as Indigenous Peoples Day. But I'll use every opportunity I can to talk about some of these issues. And I just hope I'm not going to be in New York on Saturday. I'm not going to be marching in an Indigenous Day parade, and I won't be a part of the No Kings March. But if I were, I guarantee I would be addressing the tyrannical rule of the United States with or without calling themselves kings. That has to be part of the subject. That has to be part of the conversation. So I need to put that out there. So let me shift gears a little bit. As I said, we produced a film to try to tell our story, and the difference in this film is it's not a film produced about us. It's a film produced by us. We funded it. We wrote it. The only thing we didn't do was shoot it. We did everything else. We wrote. We provided the music. We provided the narratives. We provided, a lot of its family that's in it. We got snubbed by almost every film festival, including Indigenous film festivals. Only one film festival accepted us, and that's the Red Nation International Film Festival in Los Angeles. And we'll be there next month. Our film is going to premiere just near Hollywood, right there in Los Angeles, on November 15th. I'm indifferent at this point whether I'm going to go, because I still want to do some events out here in the East. So I may send the rest of our crew out to California to participate in the film festival and concentrate on doing a few events out here. I'm still trying to get into the Maisels Theater in Harlem. We are looking good. We're doing an event at the Brooklyn Children's Museum on November 6th. We are negotiating a screening at the Nighthawk Theater in Williamsburg. I'm still talking to a few schools, universities in New York. I'm not going to name any names because you never know if Trump's going to target these schools if we throw some shade at anti-American sentiments that are expressed in our film. So we are really trying to get this out there. We want people to be aware of it. We want friends, other Native peoples, and allies to know the information that we've got contained. And we got a lot of stuff. Look, we touch everything from residential schools to mascot issues to battles over taxation, battles over gaming, battles over sovereignty, all this. We touch everything in this film. And we started by talking about our culture, and we end it by talking about our culture. So I think if you want to learn something about who we are and how we view things, the film is perfect for that. If you want to know what we went through, gone through, and are going through, this is the film for it. And you won't find this information anywhere else in a single place. This is one-stop shopping. Look, and I've got this information from Stephen Newcomb. I got this information from Peter Dorico. I got this information from John Collier. I've got this information from the elders in my community, folks like Dagarundege and Ganazaraga and Adorunya Dago, Gorunyak Daje, Yeah, I know. I just rattled off a bunch of native names that none of you will ever be able to repeat, but that's okay. These are the people who affected me. This is where this stuff came from. I got to tell you, I didn't have to do a whole lot of research to write the scripts and narratives for this film. Why? Because I've been doing the research my whole life. I've had the Peter Doricos and the Stephen Newcombs buzzing in my ear for decades now. I talk with them all the time. I've had people that not only did we include in this film, but people that we've lost over the years, and their words still resonate in my ears. So I'm not saying I don't read and I don't research. I still do every single day. I'm grateful that guys like Newcomb and Dorico are still doing the work they're doing. They're the ones who told us about this case in California, Halverson versus Burgum. Burgum is the Interior Secretary, where they cited the doctrine of Christian discovery a month ago. If they didn't do that work, I wouldn't have been aware of this. So I owe a great gratitude to the work that others are doing that allow me to repeat what they've taught me. And that's all I'm doing. Look, I haven't learned anything on my own. Everything that I speak about on this show, I learned from somebody else. Now, I verified it. I'm not just saying that I'm just parroting what somebody told me. When somebody shares something with me, I immediately go to the source. Not just them as the source of the information to me initially, but I prove it. And I say the same thing to you. If you are listening to this show, don't take my word for anything. You've got a smartphone, you've got a laptop, you've got a tablet, you've got a computer, you've got resources that none of us who are doing this work today grew up with. So you young folks, I want to light a fire. I'm not issuing a call to action. I'm saying educate yourselves and then use your judgment on what you do with that knowledge. Knowledge is not something that somebody else gives you. Knowledge is something that somebody else may prepare you to receive. But at the end of the day, it's on you to take that information, use it to shape how you're experiencing life today. Because your knowledge comes from experience, not from parroting something somebody else said to you. Nobody can teach you. They can only prepare you to learn. So I understand there are teachers, and teachers' job is to teach. I get that. But at the end of the day, those of you who become knowledgeable will only become knowledgeable because of what you took in and made your experience. How did you interpret the information coming in? And how did you determine whether what you were being told was true or not? And look, facts are facts. Opinions could vary. So I think it's important that people realize that we all can take the same set of facts and draw different conclusions from them. But at the end of the day, if you hear an opinion from me that seems wrong or unfounded, then please do go to the facts that I'm citing. When I say that we lead in death by cop, don't take my word for it. Check it out. Find out. If I tell you about missing and murdered indigenous women and girls and Native peoples, and you can't believe the numbers that I offer up, the percentage of sexual assault that Native women experience being 3 to 5 times higher than anybody else in American society, then check it out yourself. Look it up. Verify the numbers. And look, and if my numbers are off, then please correct me, because I know I'm not off by much. I might get a date off a little bit, a year or two here and there. I'm not infallible, that's for sure. But the dates and the specific numbers aren't as important as the overall messaging. So that's what we do here. Resistance Radio is about giving you enough information and enlightening you to the experiences that Native people have every day, historically and every day today. So you've got to make a decision. Where do you fit in with resistance? I mean, not just about No King's Day or, a Indigenous Peoples Day parade. By the way, the weather was lousy on Monday. That's why many of the things that were scheduled for Monday for what people have regarded as Indigenous Peoples Day, even the Columbus Day stuff got canceled, didn't they? Don't they usually have a big parade or something like that in New York? Of course they do. And of course, the president of the United States made a big, bold proclamation like he just discovered Columbus Day for the first time. I put this out there. You know, every year, November, since George Bush, the older George Bush, since he was the president, he enacted a policy of declaring November as National Native American Heritage Month. And then they designated Black Friday of all days as National Native American Heritage Day. So the day after Thanksgiving. And every president since then, every year of their presidency, they have issued a formal proclamation about the month. Donald Trump even did it during his first term. I gotta believe, especially in light of his war against wokeism and cancel culture and everything else, I mean, I gotta believe that he's not going to make a proclamation this year about National Native American Heritage Month. Now, that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. I mean, it was already written into law, I guess, or through a joint resolution of Congress or whatever Bush pushed through. I don't know. But I would be surprised. And in fact, I've asked people if they're willing to bet whether whether Donald Trump will declare November National Native American Heritage Day, since he just ran all over the top and trampled what many people have started to regard as Indigenous Peoples Day. He stomped on it and he said, "No, Italians, we're back." Like he was Italian that day or something. I mean, this is this is your president, folks. That's all I can tell you. You can take whatever responsibility or blame others for it, but it's your president. This is your system. So here we are. We're heading into a weekend. There are these events taking place on Saturday. People got to decide how they feel about it. And look, not everybody has to march for anything, but at some point in the course of everybody's lives, on a given day, at a given moment, you might be confronted with something that is presented to you that you know is categorically false. So the question is, what do you do about it? Do you challenge it? Do you stand up to it? Do you oppose it? If somebody tells you an inappropriate joke about raping children, do you laugh? Do you pretend to laugh? Do you fake a chuckle just so you can get by the moment? Or do you take a stand? I know these are tough times. You only got to look at Trump's attack on Harvard and Columbia, and you know that there are organizations, institutions that traditionally have stood up to oppression who are now becoming wary of it. Look, I felt like I was this close to entering into some working arrangement with Howard University and some of the HBCUs. And that conversation went completely dark. As I said, we didn't get accepted into a single film festival. Well, I'm sorry. We got accepted into a single film festival. Only one. All of the other ones passed us by. Now, is the quality of our film inferior? I don't know. I guess people are going to have to determine that. I'm not expecting to win any awards at the Red Nation International Film Festival, but they are screening our film. We will have the filmmakers, some of our filmmakers will be there for that screening. And I am glad, I'm honored that they acknowledged our film. And they had to watch it first. I mean, just to be clear, they had to watch it first. They aren't going to feature a film on their film festival that they don't think meets a certain standard. So we met that standard. We just didn't seem to meet any of the others. We have been blacked out of a lot of places. That's why I'm so grateful when Hofstra or any other university agrees to have me come join them. I'm thrilled with that. I want to thank you for listening to this program. I am on WPFW tomorrow from 2 to 3 o'clock, so look for me there, and I'll see you next week. This is John Kane, and this is Resistance Radio. Yahweh.